The classic American TV series The Twilight Zone is famous for many reasons. Irony, beautiful black and white cinematography, Rod Serling's narration, and social commentary. That last one was often couched in heavy metaphor for the purposes of avoiding advertiser censorship, but it was also a general feature of creator Rod Serling's work. Serling's dialogue, for instance, can largely be defined by his use of metaphor, and the writer hardly required an incentive to employ this literary device. Take, for example, People Are Alike All Over, an episode that uses aliens running a human zoo to tell a downer story about the general cruelty of human beings. There's also The Howling Man, which uses the traditional concept of the devil to explore the insanity of two world wars being waged only 20 years apart, and how terrifying that must have felt to someone who lived through both. One episode that is rarely considered anything more than a simple horror story, albeit an ingenious one, is Season 3, Episode 8, titled It's a Good Life. This episode takes place in the town of Peaksville, Ohio, where it sucks to be alive. Why does it suck? Well, you see, everyone in Peaksville has to think happy thoughts and say happy things, because the entire town is at the mercy of Anthony Fremont, a 6-year-old boy with godlike powers. At the beginning of the episode, we're told that Anthony used his powers to isolate Peaksville from the rest of the world, either taking the town to a pocket dimension or by flat out destroying everything else. The citizens of Peaksville aren't sure which. Rather than do the logical thing and turn the town into Candyland, Anthony has used his abilities to enforce certain prohibitions. You see, first off, Anthony doesn't like cars or electricity, so he got rid of all the cars and machines in Peaksville. No, Anthony isn't Amish. It would be so much easier if he was. Anthony also hates singing because he prefers instrumental music. When he heard his Aunt Amy singing one day, he basically lobotomized her with his mind. And he likes her! Anthony has also gotten rid of most of the dogs in Peaksville since none of them like Anthony. And as Anthony says, he hates anyone who doesn't like him. In fact, if you so much as have a slightly negative thought about Anthony, he might pick up on it and set you on fire, or turn you into a monstrosity and then use his powers to send you to the cornfield. That's where Anthony sends Bill Som's dog, and he likes him. Because of all this, the people of Peaksville can't even complain about their situation. Instead, they're forced to constantly reassure Anthony by saying it's a good thing that he does all that weird shit. Luckily, even without electricity, the town still has some entertainment, as on certain nights, Anthony makes television for everyone. The adults stare uncomfortably at the violent display conjured up by Anthony, trying to hide their disgust before applauding. Frankly, I don't know what their problem is. This has dinosaurs. It's fucking awesome. Hey look, it's Bill Soms. That poor schlub had to come to this kid's house to watch his stupid show the same day he killed his dog? One of those days, huh, Bill? After the show, the adults throw a birthday party for their buddy Dan Hollis and stupidly gift him a bottle of peach brandy, which he almost immediately gets drunk off of. His wife also gives him a record from his favorite artist, Perry Como. Dan hasn't heard new music in years, which is why he forgets that Perry Como sucks. But that's not the most unpleasant surprise he's going to get tonight. Dan asks to play his record, but everyone looks at him like he just his pants, and the idea is quickly squashed. Dan then gets progressively more drunk and causes a scene. As the adults look at Dan in horror, he tries to get them all to attack Anthony as a group, saying that while Anthony is focused on him, someone could hit the boy from behind with a heavy object, but the others just stand there. Anthony calls Dan a bad man, which honestly I can't blame him for. He's rude as f***. Finally, Anthony puts this rude drunk in his place by turning him into a jack-in-the-box, horrifying everyone. Anthony's father begs him to wish the jack-in-the-box into the cornfield, which he does. As Pat continues playing piano, Anthony uses his powers to make it snow. Anthony's father briefly loses his composure, saying that the snow will ruin half of the town's crops, before regaining control of himself and reassuring Anthony that it's a good thing that he's making it snow, and tomorrow is going to be a real good day. Based on the short story of the same name by Jerome Bixby, It's a Good Life is frequently cited as one of the best episodes of The Twilight Zone, and is, without a doubt, one of the most famous. It's odd, then, that unlike other famous episodes like The Monsters Are Due on Maple, there has been very little dissection of its deeper meaning in mainstream critical assessments. Namely, It's a Good Life is a story about what it's like to live in a totalitarian society. Totalitarianism is defined as a political system where the government has complete control over the people, and the citizens are subject to the absolute authority of the state, or in the words of fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, all within the state, none outside the state, none against the state. According to historian and philosopher Hannah Arendt, totalitarianism is an idea that came about in the first half of the 20th century, a fact which, along with its all-encompassing nature, distinguishes it from standard authoritarianism, where citizens are often allowed a certain degree of individual freedom, though still extremely limited. In a totalitarian society, even a person's private thoughts are property of the state. The people of Peaksville have to think happy thoughts even when Anthony's not around and they're not even sure he can hear them. That essentially makes it an ideology, something the citizens have to internalize and repeat like a mantra. In the words of Hannah Arendt, before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of man, who can fabricate it. In the early 1920s in Germany, the myth of the Dolchstoß, or stab in the back, said that Germany had not actually lost World War I, but had actually been betrayed by certain people. We'll just put it like that. This lie was later made official state history under fascism. In Imperial Japan, a special higher police, or Toko, also known as the Thought Police, were charged with saving the population from dangerous thoughts, considered a threat to the state. According to Hannah Arendt, there are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous. The citizens of Peaksville would likely agree with this sentiment. In the original short story, it's explained that they're almost always mumbling to themselves and deliberately jumbling up their thoughts, so that Anthony can't read them so easily. Also in the original story is the idea that Anthony liking you is almost as bad as him disliking you, so you have to be careful not to let him read any thoughts about you wanting your dead relatives back, or Anthony might grant your wish and send their rotting visage straight to your door. Remember, at the beginning we're told that Anthony isolated Peaksville and removed all electricity and machinery. Because of this, the town is slowly running out of supplies, and it seems to be implied that while Anthony can manipulate and destroy matter, he may not be able to create it or bring it back once destroyed. In nations run by totalitarian regimes, borders with other nations are tightly controlled, and options for trade are extremely limited, often leading to shortages. In communist Cuba, for instance, the US imposed trade embargo, along with tight government restrictions, led to the use of old, run-down cars built before the Cuban Revolution, sometimes called fontigos. In communist Albania, the concept of self-reliance was used to justify isolating the country even from other communist governments, leading to extreme poverty. To the citizens of such a nation, it would be as if the rest of the world simply did not exist. There's also the nature of Anthony's abilities. As I said, it seems like he can manipulate and destroy, but not create. In the words of Hannah Arendt, until now, the totalitarian belief that everything is possible seems to have proved only that everything can be destroyed. Totalitarian regimes are also fond of limiting the exposure their citizens have to foreign cultures, and therefore tend to maintain a monopoly over all forms of mass communications, including television broadcasts, facilitating public displays of propaganda. Naturally, you're going to want to pretend to agree with those displays if you don't want people to think you're disloyal to the state. In one famous incident, when communist dictator Joseph Stalin was being honored with a round of applause, it is said that not a single person in the audience wanted to be the first one to stop clapping, which led to the applause supposedly going on for 11 minutes. According to author and Gulag survivor Alexander Solzhenitsyn, with make-believe enthusiasm on their faces, looking at each other with faint hope, the district leaders were just going to go on and on applauding till they fell where they stood, till they were carried out of the hall on stretchers. Anthony's fickle mood and unpredictability are also interesting. According to Hannah Arendt, a key feature of the totalitarian personality is an absence of continuity. In other words, citizens of the totalitarian state are trained to expect constant change and to accept it immediately. Then there's Anthony's cornfield. In the original short story, the cornfield is just that. More importantly, it's a place where Anthony can go to get away from the bothersome thoughts of humans and enjoy the simple thoughts of the animals, who are much easier to please. In the Twilight Zone episode, it's always felt to me as if the cornfield is an area that may be a netherworld between Peaksville and the great void that surrounds it, although this is never made clear. What is clear is that the cornfield is where Anthony sends unwanted things. This is perhaps the single most unique aspect of totalitarianism, and I'm going to be very careful about how I say this so as to not violate YouTube's policies. Prison camps. According to Hannah Arendt, these prisons serve as laboratories in which the fundamental belief of totalitarianism that everything is possible is being verified. This makes sense since the cornfield is a trash dump where Anthony sends all of his grotesque creations, like Dan. It's a place something goes when Anthony is done playing with it, so it can stay out of sight and not bother people. All totalitarian dictators have places like this, regardless of their specific ideology. It might even be said that these places are the ultimate point of this system. The last connection is probably the loosest, but I still think it's interesting. As I mentioned, at the end of the episode, Anthony makes it snow, for no other reason than he wanted it to, and this will likely result in half of the crops dying, and the citizens of Peaksville undergoing a period of starvation. From 1932 to 1933, the nation of Ukraine experienced a famine, which resulted in the deaths of millions of Ukrainians, now referred to by historians as the Holodomor. While the exact causes of the Holodomor are still debated, one thing which most historians agree on is that the famine was man-made. Communist dictator Joseph Stalin had begun implementing a program of forced collectivization, where multiple families were forced into community farms and denied basic forms of private property. This was an extremely painful process for both the young and the old, resulting in many deaths, and it ultimately created a kind of new serfdom. Comrade Stalin, of course, had no sympathy for the serfs. Collectivization would ultimately lead to widespread famine, including within Ukraine. Of course, one might ask if these connections are deliberate or accidental. Certainly, the Twilight Zone did not require metaphors to hide any critiques of totalitarianism, and overt examples can be found in Peter Falk's take on Fidel Castro in The Mirror, or the all-powerful government in The Obsolete Man. But I do think that there are enough connections here to warrant at least a discussion of the idea. An interesting comparison to It's a Good Life would be the film adaptation included in the Twilight Zone movie. With a screenplay by Richard Matheson and directed by Joe Dante, the film version of It's a Good Life has both the benefits of a bigger budget than the original episode and possibly the development of child psychology. In this version, we follow school teacher Helen Foley, who gets lost looking for her new job. While stopping in a roadside diner, she accidentally runs into a kid with her car. The kid turns out to be fine, but asks Helen if she'll take him home. On the way, he introduces himself as Anthony. When Helen takes Anthony back to his house, it's immediately obvious something weird is going on, with Helen particularly bemused by the strange behavior of the adults in the house. The first brilliant addition here is Matheson and Dante's use of cartoon imagery throughout. The movie version of Anthony is older and has much more powerful abilities, possibly because of the budget increase. The second brilliant addition is the fact that the adults are honestly kind of worse than Anthony. They're all pathetic lowlifes, desperate to survive at any cost, which is in the original episode, but this version turns it up to 11. This version also loses any semblance of the totalitarian metaphor, instead exploring the consequences of giving children too much power and not enough discipline. Although one could look at it as putting a progressive spin on the story, with the school teacher influencing Anthony to use his powers for good. Ultimately, the movie version of It's a Good Life takes a much more human approach to the concept. In my opinion, the film version is well worth watching, and it's also the best segment in the Twilight Zone movie. Helen, who happens to be named after Rod Serling's favorite childhood teacher, also happens to make reference to the towns from both Walking Distance and A Stop at Willoughby, which is fun. I also want to mention It's Still a Good Life, a sequel to the original episode made 40 years later for the 2002 Twilight Zone reboot. Billy Mumy and Cloris Leachman reprise their roles as Anthony and his mother, and Mumy's actual daughter Liliana plays Anthony's daughter Audrey. The episode is written by Ira Steven Behr, one of the key voices on my favorite Star Trek show, Deep Space Nine, so it's no surprise that I really like this episode. Ira Steven Behr totally gets the dictator metaphor, and even has a scene where Anthony begins enacting his own purge. We also get to see Anthony actually set someone on fire with his mind, which he only talked about in the original episode. You can tell that Ira Steven Behr thought a lot about this world, with inclusions such as moonshine. Boy, you know who really would have liked that? Dan. One interesting feature is that Behr agrees with the notion that Anthony can manipulate and destroy, but not really create or bring things back. And this episode essentially makes that canon, if you count it as such. I highly recommend this sequel, if for no other reason than Billy Mummy's performance as a 46-year-old Anthony. He's still great at that creepy stare, and I genuinely feel bad for him when he talks about how people are always pretending to be his friend. Reminds me of the dude from Foxcatcher. The last thing I have to mention for all you theme park fans out there is that It's a Good Life also happens to be the source for the footage of Rod Serling used in Disney's Tower of Terror attraction, albeit with some digital alteration, and impersonator Mark Silverman dubbing Serling's lines. Serling's widow personally approved Silverman, so hopefully she at least got paid for that. It's a Good Life can be found on both DVD and Blu-ray sets of the Twilight Zone Season 3 or of the complete series, and is available to stream on Paramount+. Twilight Zone the movie is also on both formats, while It's Still a Good Life is included on the complete series of the Twilight Zone 2002 DVD set, and you can also see it on Tubi, and as of this upload, it's on YouTube. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I know that I'm not the first person to talk about this metaphor, but I just don't see a lot of discussion of it, and I just find it interesting, so I thought I would do a little bit of a deep dive, give some examples and stuff, and so I hope everybody enjoyed that one. Happy spooky month, happy Halloween month, happy October. I am so glad. This is my favorite month. I freaking love it, and so as a consequence, I'm going to be working really hard, and probably won't be able to get out. I was originally wanted to get out one like every week. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that, just because I'm really busy right now, which sucks. But I'm going to do my best to get out some of my best material and some really good Halloween stuff. And I'm also going to have a special video for Day of the Dead as well, so we kind of keep that vibe going, hopefully. Thank you, everybody who has supported me this whole time. Thank you, all of the subs. I got to say it again because we're still building and everything. Thank you so much for subscribing, liking, sharing. I can't tell you how much that means to me. You guys, everybody who supported me, you all rock, and I will pay you back somehow. I will do more work, I will do better work, whatever it takes. But I'm enjoying doing this as just a side thing, and I hope you guys are enjoying watching. See you guys later, and happy Halloween. Park Narcs, woo!